In the frigid autumn of 1943, as the tide of World War II began to turn against Nazi Germany, an audacious plan was hatched in the corridors of power in Berlin. The target, a historic meeting of the big three Allied leaders, Joseph Stalin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill, scheduled to take place in Tehran. Known as Operation Long Jump, this daring Nazi plot to assassinate the Allied leaders could have dramatically altered the course of the war and reshaped the post-war world order. While some historians debate the extent and reality of the threat, the story of the Tehran plot remains a fascinating chapter in the annals of wartime espionage and counterintelligence. As Allied forces made steady gains against the Axis powers in Europe and North Africa, the need for a face-to-face meeting between Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill became increasingly apparent. The leaders recognized that coordinating their military strategies and discussing post-war plans was crucial to maintaining their alliance and securing victory. However, arranging such a meeting proved to be a logistical nightmare. Stalin, the Soviet leader who had never left his country during the war, refused to travel far from the USSR's borders. He vetoed suggestions like Khartoum, Sudan, and Asmara, Eritrea, insisting on a location closer to home. After months of negotiations, Tehran emerged as the compromise solution. The Iranian capital's strategic location and vital railroad link for Allied supplies made it an acceptable choice for all parties involved. For Roosevelt and Churchill, the journey to Tehran was long and perilous. They traveled separately, taking circuitous routes to avoid detection by Axis forces. Roosevelt's trip was particularly arduous, involving a secret train journey to Miami, followed by a series of flights that took him across the Atlantic to Casablanca, then on to Cairo, and finally to Tehran. Churchill's route was equally complex, involving stops in several Middle Eastern countries before arriving in Iran. Unknown to the Allies at the time, Nazi Germany had established a significant intelligence presence in Iran in the years leading up to the conference. This network, overseen by the Sicherheitsdienst under Walter Schellenberg, had its roots in the pre-war period when Reza Shah's government was sympathetic to Nazi Germany. A key figure in this network was Franz Mayer, a German operative who had managed to maintain his position even after the Allies deposed Reza Shah and installed his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, as the new ruler of Iran. Mayer worked tirelessly to cultivate a pro-Nazi underground movement in Tehran, recruiting local sympathizers and establishing communication channels with Berlin. His efforts bore fruit when he successfully set up a drop zone for supplies and began requesting resources from Germany. This foothold in Tehran would prove crucial when the Nazis learned of the impending conference of Allied leaders. In early August 1943, the SD received intelligence suggesting a possible meeting of the Big Three in Tehran. The source of this information remains a subject of debate among historians. Some accounts suggest that the Nazis had a high-level informant, codenamed Cicero, who was working as a valet to the British ambassador in Turkey. Others point to intercepted diplomatic communications or reports from agents on the ground in Iran. Regardless of the source, the intelligence set in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the war's most daring and potentially consequential operations. Hitler, recognizing the potential to strike a devastating blow against the Allies, authorized the planning of an operation to assassinate Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. The task fell to Ernst Kaltenbrunner, chief of the Reich Security Main Office, who in turn chose the infamous Otto Skorzeny to lead the mission. Skorzeny, a daring SS commando, had recently risen to prominence after successfully rescuing Benito Mussolini from captivity in a mountaintop hotel in Italy. His audacious exploits had earned him Hitler's personal admiration and the nickname, the most dangerous man in Europe. Now he was tasked with an even more ambitious undertaking, eliminating the three most powerful leaders of the Allied cause in one fell swoop. The plan, codenamed Operation Long Jump, was as ambitious as it was dangerous. It called for a team of Nazi operatives to parachute into Iran, link up with local collaborators, and carry out a coordinated attack on the Allied leaders during the conference. The details of the operation were meticulously planned, with consideration given to everything from the timing of the attack to the escape routes for the assassins. However, As the Nazis laid their plans, they were unaware that their efforts were already compromised. The Allied intelligence services, particularly the Soviet NKVD, had begun to uncover threads of the conspiracy through various sources. One crucial piece of intelligence came from an unexpected quarter. Nikolai Kuznetsov, a Soviet spy posing as a Wehrmacht officer named Paul Siebert, reportedly extracted information about the plot from an SS Sturmbannführer named von Ortel during a drinking session. This intelligence set off alarm bells within the Soviet security apparatus. But the most significant blow to the Nazi plan came from the efforts of a young Soviet intelligence officer named Gevorg Vartanian. Leading a team of 7 operatives, Vartanian had been active in Iran since the early 1940s, identifying hundreds of Nazi agents in the country. His work would prove crucial in unraveling the assassination plot. In the lead-up to the Tehran Conference, Vartanian's team detected the arrival of an advance party of 6 German radio operators who had parachuted into Iran near the city of Qum. The Soviet agents shadowed this group to Tehran, where they set up operations in a villa provided by the local Abwehr network. Unbeknownst to the German operatives, their radio transmissions back to Berlin were being intercepted and decoded by NKVD specialists. These intercepts revealed crucial details about the assassination plot, including the planned arrival of a second team led by Skorzeny himself. The story of Vartanian and his team reads like a spy thriller. Operating under deep cover, they moved through the shadowy world of wartime Tehran, a city teeming with spies, diplomats, and soldiers from various nations. As the date of the conference approached, tensions in Tehran reached a fever pitch. The city was awash with rumors of Nazi agents and potential attacks. The Allied security services, now fully alert to the potential threat, began to take extraordinary measures to protect their leaders. The Soviet security services, in particular, insisted on changes to the conference arrangements. Most significantly, they convinced the American delegation to abandon their plans to stay at the US embassy and instead take up residence in the Soviet embassy compound. This move effectively consolidated all 3 leaders in a single, heavily guarded location, making any assassination attempt far more difficult to execute. As the Allied leaders converged on Tehran, they were largely unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. Roosevelt, Churchill, and their respective entourages arrived in the city on November 28, 1943, with Stalin joining them the following day. The conference itself was a momentous event filled with weighty discussions about the future of the war and the post-war world order. Over the course of several days, the leaders hammered out crucial decisions that would shape the final phases of the war. They agreed on plans for the cross-channel invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, Operation Overlord, coordinated military strategies on multiple fronts, and began discussions on the future of Germany and Eastern Europe. The meetings were intense and often contentious, with Stalin pushing for a second front in Western Europe, and Churchill advocating for increased operations in the Mediterranean. Amidst these weighty discussions, there were also moments of levity. Churchill celebrated his 69th birthday during the conference, complete with dancing and toasts. Stalin, known for his dark humor, joked about executing tens of thousands of German officers after the war, a comment that shocked his Western counterparts, but underscored the tensions that would come to define the post-war era. Throughout the conference, the Allied leaders remained largely oblivious to the potential threat that had been averted. After the initial team of 6 German radio operators was compromised, the main phase of Operation Long Jump, which was to be led by Otto Skorzeny himself, was abruptly cancelled. Skorzeny, who had been preparing to parachute into Iran with a larger team of operatives, never left German-controlled territory. The cancellation came as a result of the increased Allied security measures and the compromise of the advance team. Skorzeny later claimed in his memoirs that he had serious doubts about the feasibility of the mission from the start. He wrote that he considered the plan insane and believed it had little chance of success. Upon his return to Washington in December 1943, President Roosevelt shared the story of the foiled assassination plot with the White House press corps. "I suppose it would make a pretty good haul if they could get all of us going through the street," he reportedly quipped. However, given the momentous nature of the conference's decisions and the ongoing war effort, the tale of Operation Long Jump initially received limited media attention. In the decades since, the story of the Tehran plot has taken on a life of its own, particularly in Soviet and later Russian narratives. It has been the subject of books, films, and documentaries, often portrayed as a triumph of Soviet intelligence and a demonstration of the Nazi threat that loomed over the Allied war effort. The tale has been embellished and dramatized, with Skorzeny's role often exaggerated, and the heroics of Soviet agents like Vartanian highlighted. However, the veracity and extent of the plot have been questioned by some historians, particularly in the West. British intelligence officer Joe Spencer, who was present in Tehran during the conference, disputed FDR's account of the Nazi threat. Some researchers have suggested that the Soviets may have exaggerated or even fabricated aspects of the plot to justify their security measures and to emphasize their role in protecting the Allied leaders. The fog of war, combined with the secretive nature of espionage work and the potential for post-war embellishment, makes it difficult to separate fact from fiction definitively. Some argue that while there may have been Nazi agents in Tehran with ill intent, the idea of a coordinated plot to assassinate all three Allied leaders was beyond the capabilities of German intelligence at that stage of the war. In the years following the war, several alternative theories and counter-stories emerged regarding the Tehran plot. One of the most intriguing suggests that the entire plot was an imaginary one concocted by Stalin himself. According to this theory, Stalin fabricated or greatly exaggerated the threat to manipulate Roosevelt and Churchill, justifying extreme security measures that would keep the Western leaders under close Soviet control during the conference. Interestingly, Winston Churchill, unlike some of his compatriots, seemed to give credence to the reality of the assassination plot. In his post-war writings, Churchill acknowledged the threat and the intense security measures taken during the Tehran Conference. The Tehran Conference itself was a pivotal moment in World War II, setting the stage for the final push against Nazi Germany and beginning to shape the post-war world order. The fact that it proceeded without incident, allowing the Allied leaders to make crucial decisions, was of immense historical importance. The decisions made in Tehran would guide the Allied war effort through to its successful conclusion in 1945. In the end, whether the Nazi plot was as extensive as some accounts suggest, or more limited in scope, the Tehran Conference achieved its objectives. The Allied leaders left Iran with a clear strategy for winning the war and initial plans for the post-war world. The Nazi regime, its audacious plot foiled, had missed perhaps its last opportunity to dramatically alter the course of the conflict. Within 18 months of the conference, Hitler would be dead, Berlin would be in Allied hands, and the war in Europe would be over. Imagine, for a moment, a world where Operation Long Jump had succeeded, Churchill's cigars extinguished forever, Roosevelt's wheelchair empty, Stalin's iron grip loosened by death. Would the war have taken a different turn? Would the post-war order have been reshaped by new hands? The mind reels at the possibilities.